Welcome to another episode of The Watchdog here on Mint Press with me, Lowkey. As you know, we are going against the grain on a weekly basis, covering stories in a way that the mainstream media would never do. For that reason, we do require as much support from you as possible. So I hope that you can click like, you can subscribe, you can comment, and you can share this video far and wide. Now, many in British society and Canadian society are today reeling following the leaked out news by Richard Kabaj, a well-known Times journalist and filmmaker who has for many years published articles in the Times which have been very much part of this wider ambience, which is increased surveillance on Muslim communities, demonization of Muslim people, and the forcing of a proximity between Muslims and very fringe, marginal political movements at different points, and the generalizing out of those conclusions into the wider community. Now, Richard Kabaj has a book which he is publishing in the next week called The Secret History of the Five Eyes. Of course, Canada and the UK are part of Five Eyes. Now, what has been kind of put forth to the world as a new revelation is that the journey of Shamima Begum and her two school friends, they are widely touted as entering Syria and joining Daesh in 2015. Now, what Richard Kabaj has come forth with is a report from Richard Walton, who was the head of counterterrorism at the time in 2015, claiming that Walton was made aware by the Canadian intelligence services that actually the trip of these three schoolgirls had been facilitated by an agent of Canadian intelligence. Now, initially, this had been reported by Reuters, by much of the Turkish media in 2015, following the arrest of the agent. Now, what the book claims is that Walton was then informed about it and that the British government then set about helping the Canadian intelligence services to cover up this relationship. Now, the interesting thing here is that in the original article in Turkey, which used the Turkish police as a source, it was claimed that this particular agent had trafficked at least 140 people. And according to the article, all of these people were British citizens. Now, Kabaj claims in his book that mostly these 140 people were British citizens. Now, if we were to assume that all of these people were British citizens, that would be 15.5% of all British citizens who are now deemed to have, quote unquote, joined Daesh. So it's quite a considerable situation here. Now, what we also have is the same early articles using the Turkish police as the source that were published claim that the handler of this agent was actually a gentleman who went by the name Matt, who was an employee of British intelligence working out of the Canadian embassy in Jordan. Now, Richard Walton in Kabaj's book puts it this way. He says, if you are running agents, you are acquiescing to what they are doing. You are turning a blind eye to what they are doing because it is trumped by a rich vein of intelligence. A very magnanimous statement there from Mr. Richard Walton. We also know that Richard Walton previously was largely scandalized for sitting on the Stephen Lawrence review committee at the same time as having meetings with special demonstration squad figures who were actually spying on the Stephen Lawrence family after Stephen Lawrence had been killed in a racist murder, and then had been killed in a racist murder, and then the British police had failed to get a conviction. Now, what we also have is, in best case scenario, Richard Walton being informed by this agent and then either allowing or helping the public lynching of Shamima Begum in the following years is at very least tantamount to British complicity in the trafficking of its own citizens into a war zone. Now, as Kabaj puts it in the book, the quote-unquote difficulty of running agents on the ground for Five Eyes agencies is that it blurred the boundaries between legality and becoming an accessory to human trafficking. Well, it seems to be the case that these actions carried out by employees of Western intelligence agencies were illegal and were tantamount to human trafficking. Well, today we are joined by Sally Letts, who is the mother of Jack Letts, who was a young man who took a trip into Syria and Iraq throughout these years. She today is in a situation where her son has been stripped of his British citizenship. He still has his Canadian citizenship, and he is in detention in a camp in northern Syria, a situation not dissimilar to that of Shamima Begum. Sally, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
To start with, what is your reaction to this latest news regarding Shamima Begum's case?
Yeah, well, finally, the spotlight is being shone on the role of government and intelligence agencies in young people going to Syria. And there are distinct parallels in Jack's case. I mean, we knew about this story 7 years ago when it first broke in the Turkish press, and then in the Canadian press, it was reported by CBC. There was the original footage of Shamima Begum and her friends getting into a taxi, being helped by the Syrian smuggler who was hired by the Canadian intelligence agencies to get into Syria with the promise of a Canadian passport. This is what the deal was for him. But the story was very well buried by the Canadian government and by the British government for 7 years. John and I, my husband, we've been trying to get the real story out there for this entire time. And even despite a very high-profile case of the two of us, when we were tried for financing terrorism by trying to send payments to Jack to help him escape Syria. At the time, we were having to operate under the radar, because if it was known that Jack was trying to escape from Raqqa, he would have been killed by ISIS. And so bits of the story we're still finding out, obviously, because these agencies work in secrecy. But there was a certain amount of information that came out during court disclosure where we realized how we had been duped and deceived by foreign ministry, by the people who were set up to supposedly help us get Jack back. So that included charity, included the police. We were very, very naive. We believed that we had a reciprocal arrangement with the police, that they would help us get Jack back. They would tell us everything that they knew about where he was, what he was doing, and we would feed them all the information that we had. Well, it became very clear that this relationship was very one way. We were cooperating, giving them the information we had, thinking that they were helping us. I mean, looking back on it, we were incredibly naive, but we were desperate. We weren't getting any help from any quarter whatsoever. And so getting the real story out there, it has been incredibly difficult. So this is actually, I would say, the first opportunity I've had to do this in the past 7 years.
Well, it's far less than you deserve. Just to ask then, Sally, in consideration of all of this and the fact that, Jack is still a Canadian citizen, do you have any response to the recent statement of Justin Trudeau in Canada when asked, and we will show his answer to the question, he was asked about this case, and he pontificated about the need of Canadian intelligence services to be flexible and creative, were his words. Do you have any response?
Yeah, I mean, just when you think that the government can't get any more brazen and shocking, then they shock you even more. I mean, what Trudeau is saying, that it's perfectly acceptable for the Canadian security services here to engage in child trafficking. And that I actually have looked up the law for this since his statement, and I've discovered that there's a bill, C-59, I believe, that allows CSIS to operate illegally if necessary. And so this is the law that Trudeau is citing in this instance, in saying that you have to be creative, that sometimes the circumstances warrant it. There are some things that are forbidden under this law. So CSIS is not supposed to murder people, not supposed to kidnap them, doesn't mention anything about child trafficking. So it seems that if it's seen to be beneficial for security gathering, then it's all right to traffic underage girls into a war zone under the guise of combating terrorism. They're actually luring these girls into an organization where their lives are at immediate risk as soon as they cross the border. And 2 of those girls are now dead. And in my opinion, that is down to the Canadian government. The Canadian government can be accused of murder in this case because they are the ones who paid the informant to get these girls into Syria in the first place.
And just to confirm, Sally, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that while there has been legislation in Canada passed that would legalize some of these practices by the Canadian intelligence services, at that point in 2015, it was not the case. So even at that time, the advice I've received from some legal people is that it was actually illegal what the Canadian government carried out at that point in Canadian law.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. I think initially CSIS actually had Crown immunity. In other words, they could do whatever they wanted to. And so this legislation was designed to say what they could do and what they couldn't do. So in other words, to allow them this flexibility that Trudeau said allowed them to operate in a creative way. And now we find that he's saying that an inquiry will happen. But I mean, the Canadian government has been telling us for 7 years that they've been trying to desperately to doing everything in their power to secure the release of my son. And so that's the amount of credence that you can give to the government statement on any of this. I think Trudeau's promise of an inquiry means that it will get kicked into the long grass again. And meanwhile, there are 44 Canadians who are held in absolutely despicable, disgusting, filthy conditions in northeast Syria in arbitrary detention, which is against the fundamentals of all international law, which the Canadian and the British governments are just completely ignoring. And in fact, Britain, Canada, Australia are the worst. They're at the bottom of the league table in bringing back their nationals. Most of the European nationals, other countries rather, are now bringing back their women and children. The men, no one ever talks about the men. Even human rights organizations don't talk about the men. So universal human rights seems to have been thrown out of the window in all of these cases under the guise of terrorism. You say the T word, everything else goes to the wall.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I can't hear you. I still can't hear you. They've cut us off.
My fault. So, Sally, you have kindly allowed me an early copy of your book. Can you just tell the viewers what your book is about?
Yes, I actually started writing the book when John and I were going through our own trial for funding terrorism, just to try and make sense of it all, actually, and also thinking that I should document it. So it talks about Jack's life right from the time he was a child to the time of his conversion to Islam, his time in Syria. So the messages that we had back and forth between the two of us, where he said to us that he had never had a gun, he was anti-ISIS, that he had actually opposed ISIS, had been imprisoned by them 3 times. All this is known to the authorities. And we have an affidavit by Clive Stafford Smith, who managed to visit Jack in prison, to say that the accusations that were by his own mouth, it appeared to be a confession in the interviews given by the ITV and also by BBC, that those were a result of coercion. The BBC itself has said, in the context of the Ukraine, that it's actually illegal and unethical to interview people in prison because of the coercion that they are under. But somehow that same principle is not applied in the case of Syria. We don't know what happens to prison, and that's why it's illegal, because you don't know what they are subject to before and after those interviews in terms of punishment, beatings, or whatever. So the book chronicles all of that. I find it very interesting that no UK publisher would go near it. They every single one said that they didn't think that they could get the right publicity for the book. And I don't know what that means, but I had to come to Canada for the book to find a publisher. And it won't come out until February of next year.
So, Sally, could you tell us a bit about what Jack was like as a child, and also his diagnosis with severe OCD?
Yeah. Jack was always a very, very lively, very funny child, very verbally precocious. Everyone liked Jack. He was always kind of center of attention, making jokes. And then, as a teenager, he was quite a passionate arguer. He liked to debate politics and ethics and philosophy, and that was the time that he developed OCD. He was diagnosed as being very, very high on the sort of the. Well, I think he was a 9.5 out of 10, as high as you can get for OCD. And so he had very worrying symptoms of having to do things in sequence, and it was completely debilitating for him. He dropped out of school. He couldn't read. Although during that time he became consumed by learning Arabic, and he became very fluent in a very short period of time. He became very upset about what was going on in Syria, and that was the time of his conversion to Islam as well. So he became very obsessed with being the most perfect Muslim he could be. Unfortunately for him and for us, part of that being the best Muslim he could be was going to Syria to do his bit in the Arab Spring civil uprising, and the rest is history. But that vision of that truth of Jack, of who he really is, that is what has been impossible to kind of convey to the British or the Canadian public, because he has been demonized in the press. So he's no longer being the Jack that we know and love. He has become like Shamima Begum. He's been demonized. They're this monster. They're not given human rights even like other people, because they're not seen as even human.
Yeah. Sally, do you have any reason to believe, and you can answer this in as detailed or undetailed a form as you see fit at this stage, but do you have any reason to believe that Jack's journey into Syria took place with the facilitation or involvement of anyone with connections to an intelligence service, whether foreign or local?
What we do know is that he was helped into Syria by a student in Oxford who was quite a few years older than him, that Jack looked up to. They went to amnesty events together, so I thought this person was bona fide. But it's clear from messages that we saw in court disclosure that this person had been seeking a path for him to get Syria, and that one of these paths was had been responsive. Jack had contacted whoever this person was and had managed to find his way there. So this person we reported to the police. They did actually arrest him. Nobody knew what was going to happen there. It was very difficult to get any information. We were told to have no more dealings with him. And then everything was just quietly dropped. Apparently this student was researching groups abroad. And now we think obviously he was of more use to the police and intelligence services, probably in informing on the people that he was facilitating to get. I don't know if he facilitated the route for other people to get there, but that's all gone very quiet.
And just to understand, when you say researching groups abroad, do we know who he was researching these groups for, or do we have any sort of information that can be said about that at this stage?
I actually asked him to contact Jack to find out what he was doing, who he was with, what the groups were. He mentioned the names of about 4 or 5 different groups, which didn't mean anything to me because they were all in Arabic. That's all I know, really. Yeah.
So what we do know is that you did signpost the police towards the person that is believed to have had a role in directing Jack towards Syria, and that person has not been prosecuted.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. So the next question I'd like to ask Sally, because there's really another, unfortunately, quite sinister chapter to, what has happened to you and your family. How did you first come across the organization Active Change Foundation?
Active Change Foundation were actually recommended to us by the police. They were billed to us as a welfare organization who could help us because obviously we were struggling in, coping with everything that was happening to Jack. And they thought we needed extra support. So we used to travel down to see this group in London from Oxford. We had several sessions with them. And their director told us that he was trying to find a way that we could send the money for Jack to escape legally. So he would use his high-level contacts in the government, who would be able to help us transfer the money, because we actually had been told by King's College, by the academics there, that the only way that you could get out of Syria when it was from ISIS-controlled territory was via a people smuggler. And this was actually testified to in court. The two King's academics contradicted each other. One said, yes, this is the case. The other one said, denied ever having told us that. But so we believed him. We told him again what we knew. We sat in his office and we planned Jack's escape route, even how he was going to get across the country, how he was going to get across the border into Turkey. When it came to the actual trial, the director denied all of this. He said he was horrified when he heard that the police had given us permission to send the money. This was the money that he told us that he was helping us to send legally. We did actually go to the High Court to try and send the money legally. Again, that had to be under the radar, because if ISIS had known he was trying to escape, they would have killed him. But it's the same ruling as over here with CSIS, that the police can actually send funding to an organization if it's to protect informers within groups. So money can be sent with the permission of a police officer. This is what we were seeking. But when it came to the trial, then all these people turned against us and gave witness statements for the prosecution. So but at the time, as I said, we were very naive. We were desperate for help, and we believed that ACF were helping us, and we believed that we were helping them in their projects, in their de-radicalization projects, because they told us that they knew that Jack was a charismatic kid, that people would respond well to him, that the deal with us was that they would help get him out of Syria, and he could then help ACF in their de-radicalization work with their Young Leaders program, because Jack has said that he wants to prevent young people making the same mistake he made. Anyway, it turned out we were duped and we were deceived.
And just to confirm, you and the family were given explicit advice by the police that it was okay to send this money to your son. Yeah. We received permission from our Prevent welfare worker, who was also a police officer. It was all, we had received an urgent message from Jack saying, you've got to send the money. I'm really under threat here. They're going to kill me. You have to send the money. This was on Boxing Day. So in a panic, we phoned the police. Everyone was on holiday. She was on call. And she's also quite junior. She did not know what to do. She phoned her senior officer. The senior officer said no one would convict a parent for trying to rescue their child, and gave permission. And so she relayed that permission to us. We were ecstatically happy. We
couldn't send the money that day because Jack wasn't online, so we couldn't get the details. And then we were still trying to get hold of Jack. And then when everybody came back from Christmas, we got a message from the police saying, "Oh no, that device wasn't wrong, or wasn't right. Sorry, she was junior. She didn't know anything about the investigation. It was premature, and so they were withdrawing their permission." By that time, it was too late. Jack had blown his cover, and so I sent it anyway. And that's when they arrested us. They arrested us the day after.
Right. So, to confirm also, Active Change Foundation, it's been reported, and I may not have the correct impression, but they had access to your social media stuff, and they shared that without your knowledge, or they shared that with the Prevent team. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, we actually gave them the password for Jack's Facebook account. They told us that all of our sessions with them were confidential. We did think it was a bit strange that that the director always kept his phone on the table in front of us while we were having our sessions. And we said, "Should you really be doing that?" He just said, "Oh, well, they know anything. They know everything anyway." But then we found out through court document disclosure that after all of our supposedly confidential sessions with the director, he was going straight to his handler at SO15 at the Metropolitan Police and giving him all the details of our confidential conversations.
And I think it's also important for us to just spell out what exactly Active Change Foundation is. It's an organization, a charity which professes to prevent radicalization. This organization was founded in 2008 at the offices of Forward Thinking, which at the time was run by Oliver McTernan and Chris Donnelly. Chris Donnelly, former NATO employee. Oliver McTernan, also former NATO employee. The founding document for Active Change Foundation was signed by David Gilbertson, who is a senior associate fellow at the United Kingdom Defence Academy. Now, what we also know about the Active Change Foundation is that it's funded by the Home Office. It's also funded by the British Foreign Office. It has even had funding from Google and Twitter. It lists its partners as the Metropolitan Police, the Home Office, the US Embassy, and of course, RICU. Now, RICU is the Research, Information and Communications Unit, which is, it's been a very important strategic communications unit within the UK's Office for Security and Counter-Terrorism. So it seems clear that what was constructed for yourself and your family was a kind of infrastructure of surveillance around you as a family, even in this moment of great need, when you are being cooperative, when you are hoping to receive help in getting back your son. It's cynical and sadistic, actually. In terms of the way that the case played out, are there any other things that you think are important for the public to know in terms of whether it was specific academics or specific figures that played quite cynical roles in the conviction of yourself and your husband?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole defence really was ignored. Particularly the technical aspects of it. The journalists were only there at the beginning, where they heard the kind of, the horrific things that were levelled against us and against Jack. Didn't really attend court during the defence particularly, and then they were there for the verdict. And so things that we tried to kind of present during the defense were the fact that Jack's Facebook account was hacked, and also that information that had been collected on his interview, really, the BBC interview, that was actually used against us as blackmail, I have to say. I haven't really said this publicly before, but I may as well. I was told that I wasn't able to say anything about what I knew about Jack's activities after the alleged offence. In other words, all the information that we had about him as being anti-ISIS, etc., that he'd been imprisoned by them, I knew all that. I couldn't say that on the stand because if I did, then the prosecution could use this video, the BBC video, as rebuttal evidence. And at one point, my barrister was quite upset with me because he said that I strayed close to talking about Jack's activities after the alleged offence of sending the money. Because what I said was, well, Jack should be here to answer for himself. Why is his mum having to defend him when, he should be here? Why is this kind of proxy trial? His mum's having to say he's not a terrorist when the government is trying to prove on no evidence. The police still say there's no evidence Jack has done anything wrong. So when I said this, that Jack should be here to answer for himself, the prosecutor sort of muttered under her breath, well, we might get to that, meaning that this BBC interview that they were holding in reserve would be shown, in which Jack appears to implicate himself. But the interview itself, Jack told Clive Stafford-Smith afterwards he knew what he was expected to say in this interview because those were the questions that had been extracted from him in previous enhanced interrogation sessions. Yes, that has never been made public. But yes, the trial was scripted, shall we say? We knew what the outcome was going to be from the start. I mean, it had been, the jury was directed in a particular direction. Put it that way, they were directed to find us not guilty on the charge of sending the money to help him escape, which we were arrested for. But they had spent £6 million on this, so they're determined to get us on something. So they found us guilty on a brace of £200 that we sent to Jack for glasses, which was also, in my mind, trying to help lure him out of help him. Sorry, I think I'm going to have to do this again.
It was. There's nothing wrong with anything you said, but if you want to do that again,
long-winded, isn't it?
No. It's clear. It's clear. Yeah, there's nothing that you've said that's taken me off of. But if there's anything that you'd prefer,
maybe I'll just repeat the bit about sending the small amount of money. So if I can just pick up.
No problem at all.
Okay. So because the police and prosecution had already spent, actually no, that's bad again, because it's not the police and prosecution, is it, that spend the money? It's
the government. No, I mean the CPS. Would it not be the CPS?
The CPS, isn't it? Yeah.
You could say this was spent. This amount of money was spent. You don't necessarily have to identify.
Okay. So because £6 million has already been spent on our trial, they were determined to get us on something. And so we were then finally convicted on a small amount of money, £200, that I had sent to an associate of Jack, hoping that this person would enable him to, it would create a sort of social obligation so that he would then allow help Jack leave the country. And that I hadn't even been arrested for that. That was only added to the charge sheet at a later date, just to buttress the whole case. So we were told by the detective inspector that this is a highly political case, that even the decision to charge us or not would be made at ministerial level. And so we now have to live with a terrorism conviction. You can't get a job. I had to move to Canada because in Britain I can't get a job. I can't get a bank account. I can't get car insurance. We've been vilified. Can't live in Oxford anymore. And so I can never visit my brother and sister who live in the States. I can't fly in the US airspace, which extends into Canada, which means if I want to come back to Britain, I have to fly several thousand miles west before I can fly east to the UK. You can live with these things. What I can't live with is the fact that it's impeding my ability to get my son out of arbitrary detention, which is 5 years and counting.
And there's a passage in your book where you do mention this process of losing your job at the NHS because of this, and the words directly stated to you make clear that it's about this situation of your bank account being closed and so on. And also, of course, Jack's citizenship has been stripped. It's my belief that the policy towards Iraq in 2003 created vast unregulated spaces. And so in the direct aftermath of the occupation, what you had was deeply unregulated space in which all manner of corruption could be carried out, for example. But in the, when we can't forget that it was the sort of unregulated space that then opened up for the emergence of a group like Daesh. And then it's in the aftermath of, a US bombing, which was, unbelievable. In Obama's last year in presidency, it was something like 26,000 bombs. Literally, the vast majority of them dropped on the north of Iraq and Syria. And what you have then is this completely unregulated space where people are now there's mass detention that has been carried out for the last few years in these places, with swaths of human beings who are reliant on international aid in terms of help, but are stripped of all human rights. This is essentially an extension of Guantanamo Bay, which is more at arm's length. So the US is able to behave as if it has no type of culpability for the conditions in which these people are existing in. And, if you could just make clear to people how it felt to be the mother of someone who you couldn't touch, you couldn't hold, you couldn't help, who had now been stripped of their British citizenship, which sort of beckons in a new space of rightlessness for Jack. How did that feel for you?
Well, it's a complete feeling of powerlessness, because all the legislation that we've had since the Second World War, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Geneva Convention, the Mandela Principles, all these that are supposed to govern human rights and in particular the treatment of people in detention, they're all just being flagrantly ignored. And the way that the Canadian government has got around it is they're saying, well, we're not responsible. They're being held by the Kurdish administration. And so any abuses are down to them. What they fail to say is that they are supporting and funding the Kurdish administration to warehouse their citizens on their behalf, while pretending that they can't contact them, that they don't respond, that they can't even tell me whether Jack is alive or not. And the frustration at this, and the collusion as well of of the media, of the security apparatus, of the people who kind of direct the narrative on this. It is exhausting and frustrating. And I mean, the only people that I can really talk to about it are other family members who are in the same boat. And it's very difficult for them to speak out, because if they do, it can then target their family members in the camps, and there are repercussions on their family members. And so because there is this blackout of information, that they're not supposed to have mobile phones so that they can contact the outside world. But, of course, mobile phones are in circulation, so sometimes news gets back to their families via this route. So what happens? The Kurdish administration has a raid on the tents. If they're found in possession of a mobile phone, then they are put in these toilet prisons with their children. They're just locked up for 24 hours, 48 hours, or whatever, as punishment for contacting the outside world. The prisons are much more controlled. I haven't had, the only communication I've had with Jack has been through Red Cross letters, and they are sensitive of all conditions. And so what I know of his conditions has come via predominantly from Human Rights Watch, who have, and even they aren't allowed in the prisons anymore. They're being denied access. And so from them, I know that in 2019, the male prisoners weren't allowed out of their windowless cells all winter. Jack did manage to tell me, a tiny little writing in the corner, that he's forgotten what the sun looks like. So this is what I have to think about, I mean, I have to push those thoughts out of my mind in order to function, but it's there every single moment of the day.
And on top of this, the question would eat away at any parent, that when the person who has been involved in facilitating the trip of your child into this situation has been made known to the police, the person has not been prosecuted at all. And these are especially in the light of the old revelations that we seem to be being made aware of by the mainstream media now with Kabaj's book.
Yeah.
It would bring serious question marks on the whole situation. Well, Sally Letts, thank you very much for joining us today for this episode of The Watchdog. Is there anything at all you would like to add or you feel should be known before we finish the episode?
I'd just like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I greatly appreciate it. And also, I want these Western governments to stop flouting international law and just basic common decency and humanness to repatriate their citizens. It's been long enough. We're tired of waiting. We're tired. Think of the people who are detained in these horrific conditions, and bring them home now. We've had enough.
Thank you very much, Sally. Thank you.
Thank you.